On a standard supply and demand diagram, consumer supplies is the area rate above the equilibrium price of the good and below the demand curve. This reflects the fact that producers will have been willing to supply the first unit at a price lower than the equilibrium price, the second unit at a price above that but still below the equilibrium prices. Consumer surplus is the difference between the maximum price a consumer is willing to pay and the actual price they do pay. The consumer surplus is the area under the demand curve and above a horizontal line at the actual price. Consumer supplies is the definite integral of the demand function with respect to price from the market price to the maximum reservation price, the price intercept of the demand function.
Now I will present the key concept. The application of integration to economic we choose is consumer surplus. The demand function is the price that a company has to charge in order to sell X unit of a commodity. So this is the graph of demand function. So at price 0, at the quantity 0, the price is higher. And when is the quantity XX, the price is lowest. So we can say it selling largest quantity require lowering price. So the demand function is a decreasing function. At a given price, some consumer who buy a good will be willing to pay more they benefit by. The difference between what a consumer is willing to pay and what the consumer actually pay for a goods is called the consumer surplus. So this is the area consumer willing to pay, and this is the area consumer actually to pay. So this area is the consumer surplus. The consumer surplus can also be represented with the concept consumer surplus equal to maximum varying price minus actual price. So now I will present the method. To determine the total consumer surplus, we look at the demand curve and divide the interval from 0 to x into n subinterval. Each of length. To find this length, we use x divided by n, so we can get this of length of quantity. So to get the length of price, we take price of demands minus the actual price, so we can get the different price. So the total saving for this area is price demand minus price times the difference in x. So to get the total consumer, we add all this in subinterval, so we can get the formula, this formula. So to make the area consumer accurate, we need to make the subinterval more. So we let n approaches to infinity. So this Riemann sum will approaches to the integral. So we need to integrate the price demand minus the actual price from 0 to x. The consumer surplus represents the amount of money saved by consumer in purchasing the commodity at price P, corresponding to an amount demand of x. So this graph shows the interpretation of the consumer surplus, which is the area under the demand curve and above the line P. So this area is the consumer surplus.
Example and analysis. Example 1. A demand curve is given by P equals to 450 divided by x plus 8. Find the consumer surplus when the selling price is 10 ringgit. We know that P equals to 10, Sub P equals to 10 into the equations. 10 equals to 450 divided by x plus 8. Finally, we will obtain x equals to 37. The number of products sold is 37. Therefore, the consumer surplus is integrate Px minus P, and our lower and upper bound of integer is 0 and 37. Finally, we will obtain 407.25. In conclusion, by using the concept, consumer surplus equals to the maximum selling price minus the actual price. Hence, the customer surplus is 407.25. The current selling price is 10 ringgit. Therefore, the customer are willing to spend 417.25 to buy the product. Example 2. The demand for a product in ringgit is P equals to 1,500 minus 0.3x minus 0.001x squared. Find the consumer surplus when the sale level is 300. Since the number of products sold is x equals to 300, sub x equal to 300 into the equation, and we will obtain that P equals to 1,320. The corresponding price is 1,320 ringgit. Therefore, the consumer surplus is integrate Ps minus P. The lower and upper bound of integer is 0 and 300. After solving the equation, we will obtain 31,500 ringgit. In conclusion, by using the concept, the consumer surplus is 31,500 ringgit. The current selling price is 1,320. Therefore, the consumer are willing to spend 32,820 to buy the product.
As a conclusion, we have done some research about application of calculus in economics field in this project, and we have researched about the consumer surplus. Consumer surplus is the difference between what a consumer is willing to pay and what the consumer actually pay for the goods. The consumer surplus is also the area under the demand curve, and the area under the demand curve can be found by using integration method. From example 1, we can know the selling price is 10 ringgit with the corresponding amount of sale of 37 units. The consumer surplus we get is 407 ringgit 25 cents, and the consumer are willing to buy the product with 417.25 ringgit. From example 2, the amount of sales is 300 units with the corresponding price of 1320 ringgit. The consumer surplus we get is 31500 ringgit, which means the consumers are willing to buy the products with 32820 ringgit.